Is that supposed to be some kind of joke? The voice sliced through the warm afternoon air like a blade. Young, sharp, dripping with the kind of arrogance that belongs to men who've never truly doubted themselves. It was Fort Benning's annual family day. The parade ground buzzed with manufactured joy. The smell of grilled hot dogs hung thick in the Georgia heat. In the distance, the rhythmic pop, pop, pop of rifle demonstrations echoed across the base. Staff Sergeant Tyler Brennan stood there, Ranger tab gleaming black and gold on his shoulder. A half-eaten corn dog dangled from his hand as he gestured toward the old man's forearm with obvious disgust. Seriously, what the hell is that thing? Some drunken mistake from a port call in Nam? Walter Grimes didn't flinch. At 82 years old, he'd learned the art of stillness. He sat alone on a weathered park bench, a solitary island in a sea of young military families. His spine remained straight. His weathered hands rested calmly on his knees. His gaze stayed fixed on a group of children chasing a soccer ball across the parade ground, their laughter ringing out like a sound he'd once believed he'd never hear again. He hadn't come here for celebration. He'd come for something simpler, something deeper. The quiet hum of belonging, a frequency only a place like this could broadcast to men like him. Another ranger, even younger than Brennan, snickered loudly. "Looks like a worm trying to eat a bottle cap, Sarge." Brennan stepped closer. His shadow fell across Walter like a storm cloud. The festive noise around them seemed to fade, the world shrinking to the space between the sergeant's polished jump boots and Walter's worn leather shoes. He leaned in, dropping his voice to a stage whisper loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Hey, Pops, little friendly advice here. You might want to cover that thing up. It's embarrassing for the rest of us. Sets a bad example for the new recruits, you know? Army's got standards now." The small circle of rangers surrounding Brennan erupted in laughter. They were a pack, young, invincible, brimming with the energy of rigorous training and boundless confidence. They saw the world in absolutes, pass or fail, strong or weak, black or white. And before them they saw only weakness. An elderly man with watery blue eyes, skin like wrinkled parchment, a faded, blurry tattoo on a withered forearm, a messy blue-black coil of ink that looked ancient and utterly meaningless. It was a relic. And in their world of cutting-edge technology and modern warfare, relics belonged in museums, not on active-duty military bases. Walter slowly turned his head. His eyes finally met Brennan's. There was no anger there, no fear, only a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. The kind that settles into a man's soul after a lifetime of carrying secrets too heavy to share. "It has its meaning," Walter said quietly. His voice was a low, gravelly rasp. Brennan smirked, his confidence swelling like a balloon. "Oh, I bet it does. I bet you've got all kinds of stories, right? How you and your buddies fought off a whole battalion with a single rifle." He straightened up, addressing his friends with theatrical flair. "These old-timers love their war stories. Problem is, after a few decades at the VFO bar, they can't tell the truth from the fiction they've been spinning." The insult hung in the air, thick and ugly. A few onlookers, drawn by the confrontation, shifted uncomfortably. A mother pulled her child a little closer. This wasn't part of the carefully curated fun of Family Day. This was something real, something sour. "Show me your ID," Brennan demanded, his tone shifting from mockery to official authority. He was flexing the only power he had. "Let's see if you're even authorized to be here. We have to be careful about stolen valor these days." The accusation landed like a final stone cast into still water. Stolen valor. In their world, it was the ultimate sin, a betrayal of the trust and sacrifice that bound them all together. To them, Walter Grimes, with his quiet demeanor and his strange, indecipherable tattoo, was an anomaly. He didn't fit their image of a hero. Heroes were loud. Heroes were proud. Heroes had stories they were eager to tell. This man was just quiet. Walter reached into his back pocket. His movements were slow, deliberate. He pulled out a worn leather wallet, the kind that molds itself to a man's shape over decades of carrying. He fumbled with the clasp, his fingers stiff with age. Brennan let out an impatient sigh, shifting his weight from foot to foot. He was accustomed to speed, to efficiency, to immediate compliance. The old man's slowness grated on him like sandpaper, another sign of his obsolescence. As Walter opened the wallet, a faded corner of a photograph peeked out, a ghost of a young man's face barely visible. For a fleeting second, the image pulled Walter away from the sunny parade ground. He wasn't there anymore. The world went silent. The Georgia heat disappeared, replaced by the humid, oppressive weight of a jungle night. The air was thick with mud and decay. The only light came from a single sputtering candle flame. A brother in arms, his face slick with sweat and streaked with camouflage paint, held his arm steady. The sting was sharp, rhythmic, a piece of sharpened bamboo dipped in crude ink made from gunpowder and ash. He could hear their captain's voice, a low whisper more powerful than any shout. They will never know our names. They will never find our bodies. But they will know we were here. This mark is our stone, our memory. The symbol taking shape on his skin was a coiled serpent, its fangs clenched tight around a single solitary star. A pact made in the heart of darkness. A promise to a ghost unit that would soon be erased from history. He blinked. The jungle vanished. The bright Georgia sun burned his eyes. Staff Sergeant Brennan was staring at him, hand outstretched, palm up, demanding. The moment of memory, that flash of a life lived in shadows, had passed unnoticed by anyone but him. Nearby, a woman named Emily Rodriguez clutched her phone, knuckles white. She was a military spouse. She'd seen her share of bravado over the years. But this was different. This was cruelty. She'd been trying to get a picture of her son on the climbing wall when the raised voices caught her attention. Now she watched the young rangers puffing out their chests, preening for each other at an old man's expense. It made her stomach turn. She knew she couldn't intervene directly. That would only make things worse. But she couldn't just stand there and do nothing either. She remembered a conversation with her father, a retired command sergeant major, a man who'd forgotten more about the Army than these young rangers would ever know. He'd always told her, respect isn't about the rank on your collar, it's about the miles on your soul. She quickly dialed his number. Dad, she said, keeping her voice low, I'm at family day at Benning. There's a group of rangers here and they're... Her father's voice on the other end was calm, but she could hear the steel underneath. What's going on, honey? She described the scene, the mockery, the insults, the demand for identification. They're making fun of his tattoo, Dad. It's old and faded. It looks like a snake with a star. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, then a long, dead silence. For a moment, Emily thought the call had dropped. Dad, are you there? Emily, he said, and his voice was completely different now. Tight, urgent, stripped of all warmth. Describe the man. What's his name? I don't know, she whispered. Just then, Brennan's voice carried across the lawn. Come on, old man. The ID, let's see it. What's your name? Walter Grimes. Never heard of you. Emily relayed the name to her father. His name is Walter Grimes, it says. The silence that followed was even more profound than the first. When her father spoke again, his voice was a choked whisper. Oh my God. Emily, listen to me very carefully. Do not let that man leave. Do whatever you have to do, but keep him there. I'm making a call right now. You have no idea who you're looking at. The line went dead. Emily stood frozen, her heart pounding. The crowd around the confrontation was growing. A circle of silent witnesses to a humiliation rapidly approaching its peak. She looked at Walter Grimes, at his quiet dignity in the face of such arrogance, and a chilling realization washed over her like ice water. The young rangers thought they were predators cornering their prey. They had no idea they were children poking a sleeping dragon. The phone call from retired Command Sergeant Major James Donnelly hit the base commander's office like a lightning strike. The aide on duty, a young captain accustomed to scheduling meetings and fielding calls from politicians, was not prepared for the raw urgency in Donnelly's voice. I don't care if he's in a meeting with God himself, Donnelly barked, his voice cracking with an emotion the captain couldn't place. You get Major General Kessler on this line right now. Tell him it's about Phantom 6. Sir, I'm not familiar with that. You don't have to be familiar with it, son. Just say the name. The captain rattled, put the call on hold, and burst into the general's inner sanctum without knocking. Major General Robert Kessler, a man whose stern visage seemed etched onto the very soul of the base, looked up from a stack of reports. His eyes darkened with annoyance. This had better be a matter of national security, Captain, he growled. Sir, I have retired Command Sergeant Major Donnelly on the line. He's extremely agitated. He said to tell you it's about Phantom 6, and that a man named Walter Grimes is on the main parade ground. The effect of those words was immediate and terrifying. The color drained from General Kessler's face. The pen in his hand slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the polished oak of his desk. His gaze shot to a small, unassuming frame on his credenza. It held a black and white photograph. A dozen young men in worn jungle fatigues, their faces gaunt and shadowed, but their eyes burning with an unsettling intensity. They were ghosts. They were all supposed to be ghosts. My God, the general whispered. He stood up so quickly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. He's alive. The formidable commander was gone, replaced by a man staring into the abyss of his own history. He grabbed the edge of his desk, knuckles white. The captain stood frozen, witnessing a reaction he couldn't possibly comprehend. "Get my car," the general ordered, his voice a low, powerful command that vibrated with decades of authority. "Now, scramble the base honor guard. I want them on the parade ground in 5 minutes. Get Colonel Jennings from the historical archives. Tell him to bring the sealed files on Operation Phantom 6 and get the Ranger, regimental commander, and his entire command staff. I want them standing on that field when I get there. Move." Back on the sun-drenched lawn, Staff Sergeant Brennan's patience had finally evaporated. Walter Grimes's silent refusal to be intimidated, his calm defiance, had worn through Brennan's thin veneer of professional control. He saw it as a personal challenge, a rejection of his authority in front of his men and a growing crowd of onlookers. "All right, that's it," Brennan snapped, taking a step forward. He reached out, his intention crystal clear. He was going to grab the old man's arm and physically escort him from the premises. "You're done, old man. You're causing a public disturbance. I think it's time we took a little walk. Maybe a trip to the VA for a checkup is in order. See if your head's on straight." It was the ultimate overreach, a threat wrapped in a condescending insult. To suggest a man of Walter's age was senile, to physically lay hands on him, it was a line that should never have been crossed. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Emily, the woman on the phone, felt a surge of cold dread. This was escalating far beyond mockery. Just as Brennan's fingers were about to close around Walter's arm, a sound cut through the air. Sharp, insistent. It wasn't the festive music or the pop of the rifle range. It was the wail of sirens, growing closer at an alarming rate. These weren't the sirens of a fire truck or an ambulance. They were the distinct, authoritative blare of a command convoy. Heads turned. All eyes swiveled toward the main road. A fleet of 4 black staff cars, led by 2 MP vehicles with lights flashing, was speeding toward them. They didn't slow down. They drove directly onto the grass of the parade ground, scattering families who'd been picnicking on blankets. The cars screeched to a halt less than 50 feet from the confrontation. Doors flew open before the vehicles had fully stopped. MPs in crisp uniforms fanned out, creating a wide, impenetrable perimeter. They moved with silent, intimidating efficiency that immediately changed the entire atmosphere of the event. The festive air vanished, replaced by a tense, electric silence. From the lead car, a figure emerged. The afternoon sun glinted off the 2 polished stars on his collar. Major General Robert Kessler. He was flanked by his aide, the base command sergeant major, and a handful of other grim-faced, high-ranking officers. They moved across the grass like a force of nature, their eyes fixed on the small drama unfolding by the bench. The crowd parted for them as if by an invisible hand. Staff Sergeant Brennan and his rangers snapped to attention, their bodies rigid, their faces a comical mask of shock, confusion, and dawning terror. The corn dog was long forgotten, dropped in the grass. Brennan's mind raced, trying to comprehend what was happening. Why was the base commander, a 2-star general, personally responding to a minor disturbance with a full honor guard and his entire command staff? General Kessler strode past the petrified rangers as if they were statues. He didn't give them a single glance. His entire focus, his entire world, was the old man sitting on the bench. He stopped a few feet from Walter Grimes. For a long moment, the 2 men just looked at each other, an 82-year-old sergeant and a 58-year-old general, separated by decades, but connected by a history no one else there could possibly understand. The general's stern, weathered face seemed to soften, the hard lines around his eyes easing. He took in the faded blue-black tattoo on Walter's forearm, the coiled serpent, the single star held in its fangs. It was exactly as the archives had described it. Then, in an act that sent a shockwave through the silent crowd, General Kessler drew himself up to his full height. His back ramrod straight, he raised his hand to his brow and executed the sharpest, most meaningful salute of his entire decorated career. His voice, a commander's voice used to booming across entire formations, was clear and resonant, filled with an emotion that bordered on reverence. "Sergeant Grimes," he said, his voice carrying across the stunned silence. "It is an honor, sir." He held the salute, his arm rigid, a statue of pure, unadulterated respect. Slowly, painfully, Walter Grimes rose to his feet. He met the general's gaze, and with a weary grace that spoke of battles both seen and unseen, he returned a slow, tired salute. The gesture was a bridge across 50 years of forgotten history. General Kessler dropped his salute and turned to face the crowd. His eyes swept over the onlookers, the families, and finally settled with the weight of an avalanche on Staff Sergeant Brennan and his men. A colonel stepped forward, handing the general a thin file. "For those of you who don't know," the general began, his voice now cold as steel, "you are looking at a living legend. You are looking at the last surviving member of a unit that, until this morning, was considered a ghost." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Military Assistance Command, Vietnam Studies and Observations Group, Task Force Phantom 6. He let the name hang in the air. It meant nothing to most. But to the military historians and the high-ranking officers present, it was the stuff of myth. A unit so secret its records were ordered sealed for 50 years. A unit that officially never existed. A unit comprised of the toughest men this army has ever produced, sent on missions no one else would dare undertake. He opened the file. In 1968, during the Tet Offensive, an Air Force intelligence officer was shot down deep in enemy territory in Laos, near the Ho Chi Minh Trail. He carried information that, if it fell into enemy hands, would have compromised entire strategic operations in the theater. It would have cost thousands of American lives. The general paused, his eyes finding Walter's. The president authorized a rescue, but it was deemed a suicide mission. No conventional unit could get in and out, so they sent Phantom 6, a 12-man team. They were inserted 50 miles behind enemy lines with one objective: get the pilot. His voice dropped lower, but somehow carried even further. They were surrounded, outnumbered 100 to 1. For 3 days they fought. They fought until their ammunition ran out. They fought with noise and with their bare hands. He looked down at the paper, though he didn't need it. They got the pilot. They got him to the extraction point. But the unit was overrun. The official record states the entire team was wiped out. Lost in action. Bodies never recovered. Their names were erased. Their mission buried. All for the sake of national security. He looked up, his gaze piercing. But the record was wrong. One man survived, wounded, alone, hunted for weeks. He made his way through the jungle and back across the border. This man, Sergeant Walter Grimes. A wave of awe and shame washed over the crowd. People were openly weeping. The young Rangers looked as though they'd been physically struck. The faded tattoo wasn't a drunken mistake. It was a tombstone. It was a battle flag. It was the last vestige of a brotherhood of ghosts. General Kessler closed the file with a sharp snap. His gaze, now burning with cold fire, fell upon Staff Sergeant Brennan. "You," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "You and your men, you wear the Ranger tab on your shoulder. You stand here on this sacred ground, and you dare to disrespect a man who embodies every value that tab is supposed to represent." He took a step toward them. They flinched. "You think you know hardship? You think you understand sacrifice? You are not fit to stand in this man's shadow. Your arrogance today has brought shame upon this uniform, upon the Ranger Regiment, and upon the memory of every soldier who died fighting for what you so clearly take for granted." He gestured to the base command sergeant major. "Take their names, every single one of them. They will be confined to barracks, and they will each write a 10,000-word essay on the history of Mackisog with specific focus on Task Force Phantom 6. They will deliver it in person to Sergeant Grimes's home with a formal written apology." He turned back to Walter, his expression softening once more. "Sergeant, Walter raised a hand, stopping him. "General," he said, his voice quiet but firm, carrying a wisdom that shamed all the anger in the air. "They're just kids, full of fire and vinegar. We were the same once. It's easy to forget when you're that young that the uniform doesn't make the soldier. The soldier makes the uniform." His words weren't an excuse, they were a lesson in humility, grace, and the quiet strength that had defined his entire life. As he spoke, the image of the tattoo seemed to sharpen in the afternoon light. The world flickered again. He was young again, barely 20, huddled in a dark, smoky hooch deep in the Aisho Valley jungle. The air was thick with fear and camaraderie. Their captain, a man with eyes that had seen too much, held up a needle and a pot of ink. "There won't be a parade for us," the captain had said, his voice a low rumble. "There won't be a stone with our names on it. The world will never know we were here. But we will know this symbol, this phantom serpent. This is our stone. This is our promise to each other that we did our duty, no matter the kita." He looked at the faces of his brothers, young men who would be dead in 72 hours, as they took the needle one by one, branding themselves as family, as ghosts. The story of what happened on the parade ground at Fort Benning spread like wildfire. The military spouse, Emily Rodriguez, wrote a blog post that was shared tens of thousands of times. National news outlets picked it up. The Pentagon, facing a public relations nightmare and a genuine outpouring of support for the forgotten hero, moved swiftly. Within a week, a formal ceremony was held. In front of the entire base, General Kessler pinned the Distinguished Service Cross and a Purple Heart on Walter Grimes' chest, medals he had earned over 50 years earlier. The Army issued a public apology, not just for the incident, but for the decades of silence. As a direct result, a new training module on military history and the importance of respecting veterans of all eras was mandated for all incoming soldiers, starting with the Ranger Regiment. A few weeks later, Walter was sitting in his usual booth at a local diner, a quiet place where nobody knew his name, or at least pretended not to. He was stirring a cup of black coffee when the bell above the door jingled. A young man in civilian clothes walked in, looking uncertain. He scanned the room. His eyes landed on Walter. It was Brennan. He approached the booth, his posture no longer arrogant, hesitant, humbled. He stood by the table, shifting his weight. "Sir, Sergeant Grimes." Walter looked up and nodded. "Son, sit down." Brennan slid into the booth. He looked exhausted. He placed a thick, bound document on the table between them. "This is my essay, sir, and my formal apology." Walter pushed it aside gently. "I don't need to read it. I only need to know if you understand it." "I do, sir," Brennan said, his voice quiet. "I understand now, but if you don't mind me asking, I don't want to know about the battle. The reports covered that. I want to know about the men you served with. What were they like?" And so Walter Grimes began to talk, not of firefights or ambushes, but of small human moments. He told a story about a man named Miguel Santos who could make a gourmet meal out of sea rations. He talked about their captain, who read poetry to them in the dark before missions. He spoke their names, bringing the ghosts back to life, not as soldiers, but as men. For an hour, the young ranger listened, his preconceived notions of heroism and warfare being dismantled and rebuilt into something truer, something more profound. When Walter finished, Brennan simply nodded, his eyes filled with a new understanding. He stood up, placed a $20 bill on the table for the coffee. "Sir, thank you." He turned and walked out of the diner, a different man than the one who had walked in. Walter Grimes' story is a powerful reminder that heroes walk among us, their greatest battles often hidden from view. If you were moved by his courage and humility, please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to BR Veteran Stories for more stories of unassuming heroes.